It all began on January 7th, 2025. Southern California had been dealing with an unusually dry stretch, but that morning, everything shifted. Powerful Santa Ana winds swept through Los Angeles and San Diego counties, kicking off what would become one of the most destructive wildfire events in California's history. By the end of the month, 14 separate fires had burned across the region. These fires weren't just big, they were fast, hot, and impossible to control in some areas. Firefighters were up against wind gusts that reached 100 miles per hour in some spots. That's hurricane-level strength. The winds didn't just spread the fires, they tore down power lines, knocked over trees, and made it nearly impossible for ground crews to get close. On top of that, humidity levels dropped dangerously low, turning the region into a tinderbox. The conditions weren't exactly a surprise. Just a few days before the fires started, the National Weather Service had issued red flag warnings. Those warnings said it could be a particularly dangerous situation, especially in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Forecast models were already calling for extremely critical fire weather, and those predictions turned out to be right on target. One of the first signs of trouble came earlier than most people realize. On January 1st, a small fire called the Lockman Fire broke out. It didn't do much damage, it burned only 8 acres, but it started in the exact area where the much larger Palisades fire would begin days later. That small fire was an early red flag, and it turns out it was a warning of what was coming. By January 3rd, the Storm Prediction Center was already forecasting an extremely critical fire risk for January 8th. These warnings don't come lightly. That same week, they began marking nearly every day in mid-January with at least a critical fire risk. From January 7th to 15th, Southern California had almost no break in fire danger, and that was just the beginning. By January 8th, the worst fears had started to come true. Fires were breaking out all across the southern part of the state. The two biggest fires, the Eaton Fire in Altadena and the Palisades Fire in Pacific Palisades, were already showing signs of becoming major disasters. Fueled by bone-dry vegetation, low humidity, and those intense Santa Ana winds, the flames moved faster than anyone expected. This wasn't just bad luck, it was the result of a perfect storm created over months, even years. Back in the winter before, California had experienced a period of unusually heavy rain. That led to a burst of plant growth all over the region. Grasses, shrubs, and other vegetation flourished. But then everything dried out. That green growth became kindling. Scientists later confirmed that climate change had played a huge role. According to researchers at the University of California, temperatures in 2024 had been unusually hot. Just the difference between the 2024 heat and the average temperatures since the 1980s accounted for 25% of the moisture loss that fueled the wildfires, and that estimate was considered conservative. Another analysis showed that the area was now up to 5 degrees Celsius hotter, up to 15% drier, and up to 20% windier compared to the mid-20th century. That combination made wildfires far more likely and far more dangerous, and because climate change has made California's wildfire season longer, it now overlaps with Santa Ana wind season. That overlap is exactly what happened here. The fires kept spreading. People had to move fast. Over 200,000 residents were evacuated across the region. Homes, neighborhoods, and entire hillsides were swallowed by flames. And tragically, at least 30 people lost their lives during the disaster. One of the hardest hit areas was Malibu's Carbon Beach, also known as Billionaire's Beach. Some of the richest people in California lost their homes in a matter of hours. Fires don't care how big or expensive a house is. When the wind is blowing that hard and the vegetation is that dry, there's not much anyone can do to stop it. By the end of the month, the wildfires had burned more than 57,000 acres and destroyed over 18,000 homes and structures. The total damage was estimated between $250 and $275 billion. That made the Eaton and Palisades fires likely the second and third most destructive fires in California history. Fire departments from all over the state responded. Cal Fire, along with local crews, worked around the clock. Tactical aircraft dropped fire retardant from above, while ground teams battled the flames directly. Still, it took until January 31st to fully contain the two largest fires. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, the city's fire department was already under pressure. Their budget had been cut by over $17 million just a few months earlier. That meant fewer hours for training, less brush inspection, and less equipment available. Even though they later received some added funding, That early budget cut made it harder to prepare for a disaster like this. To make things worse, fire departments all across the country were dealing with long delays in getting new vehicles. Prices had gone up, and supply chain issues meant departments were waiting months or even years for new trucks. All of this combined made firefighting efforts during these wildfires even more difficult. Another major problem was how older neighborhoods were built. Fire scientists pointed out that in places like the Palisades, most of the homes had been built in the 1950s and 60s. Back then, there weren't strict rules about fire-resistant materials, so you had wood frame houses, thick vegetation, and homes built close together, basically the perfect recipe for one house fire to spread to the next. In newer neighborhoods, California has building codes that require homes in fire zones to be made with materials that are less likely to burn. But those rules don't apply to homes built before the codes were put in place. That's one of the reasons why the fires spread so fast in certain areas. The electric grid also played a role. Some experts said the grid in Los Angeles was only designed to handle wind speeds up to 56 miles per hour. That's way below what actually happened. In some places, gusts hit 100 miles per hour. Utility companies didn't have a system to shut off power in high-risk urban areas, which might have prevented some fires from starting when power lines fell. And then there's the issue of homelessness. According to past reports, more than half of the fires the Los Angeles Fire Department responds to are connected to homeless encampments. It's not always intentional. Many start from cooking or trying to stay warm, but in dry conditions like these, a single spark near a tent can become a wildfire. Despite everything, local organizations stepped in to help. Groups like the Michael Spison Found Animals Foundation and the Better Neighbor Project started collecting donations and helping families who had lost their homes. It was a reminder that in the face of disaster, people still come together. By the time the fires were fully contained at the end of January, Southern California had been through one of its toughest months in recent memory. 14 wildfires had swept through neighborhoods, hillsides, and forests. Over 57,000 acres had burned. More than 18,000 homes and buildings were gone, and over 200,000 people had been forced to leave everything behind. The fires showed just how much the climate has changed. From strong rains that create more fuel to longer dry seasons and higher temperatures, every part of the environment now seems primed for wildfires. Scientists have warned that these events aren't going to be rare anymore. In fact, they're becoming the new normal. Wind speeds are getting more intense. Vegetation is growing faster than drying out quicker. Controlled burns, which help reduce fuel, are harder to schedule because there are fewer safe days to do them. And even though we have more advanced tools and forecasts than ever, fires like these move so fast, even the best teams struggle to keep up. The January 2025 wildfires were a wake-up call, a reminder that big disasters don't always start with explosions or earthquakes. Sometimes it's just one spark, a gust of wind, and a hillside covered in dry brush. And when all those things come together, the results can be devastating. As California continues to recover, the questions remain. How do we adapt? How do we build smarter? And how do we prepare for what's clearly becoming a longer, more dangerous fire season? Only time will tell, but for now, one thing is clear. This wasn't just another fire season. This was a warning.